Okay, hey everybody, welcome to another episode of On the Wrist from Off the Cuff. Today we have another great review for you from the brand Christopher Ward. A little bit about them. They're of course out of London and the UK. They're a micro brand now, I'd say, on certain levels, but I think they've really surpassed that. And let's just go ahead and call them a boutique brand at this point. They've definitely kind of paid their dues, and due to just kind of the range and the breadth of their lines, as well as, you know, some of their capabilities at this point, and I think even just the mass amounts of releases that they have and different genres that they cover and different model releases, you know, you kind of have to give them credit where credit is due. They're by no means, you know, some big name brand out in department stores. They still sell directly. So that's one way that they're still staying very much, you know, within that original formula of, you know, being kind of a smaller, more independent brand, selling direct, building those personal relationships with their customers, and having a lot of repeat customers at that. If you guys are fans of the channel, you know I've reviewed tons of Christopher Ward's, you know, over the years, especially the Trident line, especially this Mark III line. This is, you know, probably one of, I guess, like, this might be the fourth Mark III on the channel, and that's just, you know, just for the latest release, let alone counting all the other Trident C60s that have come along the way. But a little about these types of watches and key common characteristics and design language you're looking for a dive watch. What this is of course you're going to want some type of water resistance, typically some type of screw down crown. You're going to want something that's tough, legible, with a dive bezel, and then a diver's extension is always nice if on bracelet. This model we're going to be reviewing today is the C60 Elite 1000 COSC. So this is a certified chronometer, as you can see here. So it's going to keep really great time. These currently are retailing around $16.80 direct from Christopher Ward, and that's on bracelet, or you can get them for $14.25 on strap. I think at those prices, considering how capable this watch is and kind of all the specs and everything goes into it, I think that's actually a pretty good deal, which is tough to say for a smaller brand with, you know, not too much history or anything like that, selling you something that is, you know, over 1,500 bucks. So with all that said, let's go ahead and take a closer look. All right, guys, so before we dive into it, some of you who are new to the channel, maybe even new to the watches, don't even know what COSC is. Basically, they are a group that does certifications to say, you know, a watch or a movement meets certain regulations and ranges to be considered a chronometer, and that basically means it's going to be, you know, within, I believe, +6 and -4 a day variation, essentially, and as long as it's within that variation, then it's able to be a chronometer. Some of you might be thinking, wow, that's not even very and actually, if you guys want to go back, and you can pause right here if you want to take a look, this thing is super in tune there. Really great timing. I mean, basically less than a second of variance in a lot of situations, so really nice from that standpoint, guys. But basically, mechanical movements, they're not as they're basically not as accurate as quartz movements, or, you know, of course, atomic movements, and from that standpoint, stuff on your phone. But basically, all of everything that's in here, there's no battery. It's just a bunch of gears and spring and a couple of jewels and whatnot, and basically that creates the timing. So when you think about it, that all that you know, all that mechanical magic is happening behind the scenes. It's actually pretty impressive that they can get stuff that's within this type of accuracy, where you're only going to be, you know, 1 second up a day, which is about what this is running, less than a second, basically. And yeah, this is a really awesome piece. You guys might recognize the general look if you're fans of the channel, because you remember the original Mark III, which essentially is a very similar watch here, guys, similar in specs and everything, except this one is, it's funny to say, only 600 meters of water resistance versus 1,000 meters of water resistance. And you can see there's not too much of a difference in the thickness when you really look at it. I mean, I think on paper you see the differences in the thickness a bit more, Basically, it's 15.4 millimeters thick, and because of the contours in the case, which do help the thinner 600 meter depth rated model, it actually is going to appear thinner, as well as wear thinner and feel thinner because of all these beautiful contours that are cut into it. But there are quite a few differences if you just put them side by side, guys. The biggest difference, of course, is that this is a titanium watch with a titanium bracelet. This is a stainless steel as the standard model, and of course is much cheaper. So, but as far as, you know, a lot of else, you can't necessarily tell the differences at a quick glance. But one thing a lot of people don't even really notice, even I'd say maybe even some owners don't notice, is that the gear, the gripping on the bezel and on the crown are actually different. Here you see a finer coin edge bezel, and then here you have your typical gear tooth, which I think is a really nice setup. I enjoy the gear tooth. It's definitely nice and grippy and performs really well. But I will say that this finer coin edge definitely gives you just a touch more refinement from that standpoint. Just basically, they've taken this thing up, you know, to the nth degree, and they've got it, you know, even when you take a look at the bezel insert, you can see here's just the basic high gloss finish there, and then here you have that brushing, and then the details. You can see here, looking at the numbers and whatnot, and the indexes on the bezel, that they're almost a bit 3D. There's just a little bit of just a 3D-ish kind of texture, a certain roundness to the filling, which is great because it is, of course, it is loomed. But here, it is just another level of sharpness. Look how much sharper this thing is. And then of course it's also fully indexed. It actually has the day-date complication versus the typical just the date. So those are some big differences up front. Of course, it's still going to have a very similar color scheme, whatnot. Even the finish here, I don't know how well the camera is going to be able to pick up the difference, but I mean, the titanium versus the steel, I'd say the titanium almost has a little bit of it looks like a slightly finer brush to it. It might just be a bit of a placebo effect because this is a brand new watch and this is one that I've had for quite some time now. But I would say that there's something really special about this. And the crazy thing is it's not super like lightweight, but it's definitely not as heavy or hefty. It's a real balance, because I know for a lot of people who are into mechanical watches, when you want something mechanical, you like to have that feeling of heft because you kind of equate that with a feeling of quality versus a quartz watch, which will be a lot lighter because it's a much smaller movement. But here you have, of course, mechanical movement, but everything else is just wrapped in titanium and you know, that lightweight feature. And of course, ceramic in the bezel insert isn't very heavy, so that's not going to add too much to it. But some styling cues that you might not recognize, that you might think are actually brand new to this chronometer spec, are actually carried over from a previous COSC day-date model from my collection, as you can see here. Definitely nice with the red accents, and then you do have that splash of red there on the seconds hand, and then you can even see down to the bezel insert where you have the fully graduated index there, essentially for every minute or every second, depending on how you're timing it. You also have the 5, the 10, and the 15 there versus your basic layout on on your standard C60, which basically is going to just be the indexes there and then numerized afterwards. So nice touch there. I think a nice carryover. Of course, this is a previous generation, and this one was also a limited edition. This was actually number 007 of however many that they made. Let's see, how many was there? Of 200. So this was number 7 of 200. And I really like this. I really like this layout. I actually even bought a Mark III with the white dial, is how much I liked this one. But after that case, guys, I mean, the contours, that light catcher case. It's tough to kind of go back to something with a very basic side slab after you've kind of experienced something at just this higher caliber as far as the fit and finish go. And there's just more to it. And you know, if you haven't seen my Trident Mark III review, you probably don't know that there's a lot of great features on here. Of course, you have a micro adjustable bracelet there, which you can actually do on the fly to give you about a link's worth of adjustment. And then you also do have even a toolless quick release system on your bracelet, as well as now a display case back, which I think is great. I mean, of course, the Sellita SW200 movement in here isn't, you know, some big time fancy movement or anything, but I think it's nice to have that feature because it just shows how overbuilt this watch is, because typically, right, you're going to get a solid case back on a diver. If they want to make it a display back, that means that it's so built to such a spec that even with the display back, it's still maintaining its water resistance. And here, not only did they maintain the water resistance, it even went up, because this piece right here is actually, you know, as mentioned, the name 1000, it is 100 atmospheres or 1000 meters water resistant. So this thing is legit, you know, heavy hitter when it comes to specs. You have the integrated helium release valve, which isn't a part of the standard model. And yeah, sure, it's not the greatest looking thing, but I think it's a nice feature to have. And it's really more so kind of part of that currency with dive watches. With divers, there are things that make you know, that are the measuring sticks for different divers. How deep they go is a big part of that. How many, you know, technology sets and feature sets that they pack in are another thing. You know, the contours, the sizing, though they've been able to kind of wrap these specs in with this gorgeous case here. Guys, look at the beveling there on titanium. And then it still has the undercut, but now it's more of a bead blast finish versus the high polished undercut, but it still does the same. It has the same effect, which the nice thing is that it really breaks down those lines on the case. So it actually helps the case wear thinner and visually appear thinner on the wrist as well, which is great. Of course, these specs, this is a 42 millimeter in diameter watch. It's 15 millimeters thick. It has 49.3 millimeters measuring lug to lug there. This is grade 2 titanium, which is basically the same grade of titanium used in the No Time to Die, you know, special edition Seamaster 300. I know a lot of people who are kind of not really big on different types of metals and whatnot might think, oh, grade 2, why isn't it, you know, grade 4 titanium? Basically, grade 2 is the higher of the titanium specs that is pure. It's not an alloy. There's no aluminum added in, or I forget. It's a V component that's also added in when you get into different grades. So this is actually a pure titanium watch, which there are some benefits to that. Yes, it doesn't have the same, I guess, hardening as you would get from something that is a higher grade of titanium, but this is a pure titanium versus an alloy, which would have, you know, other types of metals mixed in. Although you mix those in, and there's some benefits to it as well. But you know, if this same titanium is on, you know, the titanium Oris Aquis and the titanium you know, Omega Seamaster, then you can't really be too mad at them using grade 2 titanium. Now, as far as this case, guys, again, the light catcher case, you have those bevels. It's chiseled. It is just shaped. There's not a boring or dull moment on this timepiece. Everything is beautiful. As you can see here, a much more simple route, which is a route that many other brands have taken with the big side slab, whatnot. And this was still a very handsome watch, but in comparison to, you know, what we have here now in the latest generation and release, and I you know, I really love how this one came out, and I was a little bit worried about the thickness, but honestly the thickness is quite negligible, especially when you consider a lot of it is actually in the case back, which is sitting on the back of your wrist anyway. So it's not like the mid case is thicker or the bezel thicker where you're going to see a lot of heft difference. The basically most of the difference on here is going to be from the case back. Can you guys see that there? I mean, of course the mid case probably is a hair thicker, but it's quite negligible. And I mean, I think even the bezel might even lay a little bit flatter. So it has a way of hiding that thickness from you and you never noticing, which I think is a really great way to do it. Now, as far as the crystal, this is a sapphire. Of course, it's flat with inner AR coating, so you can see it's really negotiating reflections really well. And then you have a 120 click unidirectional rotating bezel, fully loomed ceramic. Ooh, man, they really knocked it out of the park with this bezel action, guys. This bezel action is better than the steel model. You hear that? It's just that balance of smooth but notchy that really screams premium, and just shows just the level of care that was taken into engineering. Just a quick comparison here, although not a bad bezel by any means, this action is much notchier. Beautiful action, don't get me wrong. But in comparison here, this is just another level up, so. Whew. And typically with a titanium variation from a steel watch, I found that the acoustics just aren't quite as good as far as like the satisfaction on those snaps. But man, this thing feels absolutely outstanding in hand. I gotta say that, wow. Very, very impressed with the action on that 120 click unidirectional bezel. Of course, the ceramic insert is fully loomed and brushed, beautifully matte. And man, the execution on here, guys, just take a close look at that red triangle, at those graduations for the first 15 that go all the way around. Man, really, really beautifully done. Now, as far as this dial, of course, it's polished, very similar to the standard dial there. The layout's all very similar. The only difference is you're going to have the day-date, which I think actually balances the dial quite a bit better there. As you can see, hold it at just an angle, you can actually see that ghosted Christopher Ward logo there. Very nice. But the nice thing is you have that beautiful, it's just almost invisibly black. It's so deep and so dark. It's almost nice when you catch a couple of reflections off of the dial, because it kind of lets you know that there's a dial there and it's not just this big negative space, because of how dark and inky and black that it really is. As far as the hands go, similar affair there, guys. Very similar finishing with the polish and then the brush accents. You just now have that nice red tipped second hand there as a really nice just kind of pop of color, and also does help with legibility, so you can kind of follow that in daylight. That red stands out a bit more over the black, and then of course in my where I record, essentially it's a completely dark room with studio lights, so the reflection that's going to come off of it is always going to be of a dark room, so it even can make polished surfaces kind of disappear. Here's an example. Look at the reflections coming off of here. You can see it's all just very dark, because that's the room that it's reflecting off of. And then even here, it helps with the white dial because you're getting a reflection of the dark room over the polished indices and hands, which make it very legible in this lighting. But then here, of course, it's hard for you to kind of catch some of those nice polished bevels and whatnot on each one of these. Really, really nice, guys. So as far as the Loom, everything's the same. You still have that grade X1 GLC1, so it glows really green, super white during the daylight though, which is nice versus your typical C3, which is going to show a tint of green. As far as the specs and diameter, everything is the same. You got 22 millimeters tapering down to 18, fully milled clasp here, beautifully done, and you even do have a looks like a little steel insert there for the friction from the pushers, which I think is a nice, thoughtful move, because when you have, if you're a fan of knives, of course, when you have hardened steel coming into contact, friction points with titanium, it's something that can wear. And titanium, although it's stronger, you know, it's similar to when you think about sapphire versus something like acrylic. It's stronger, yes, but it can chip. It won't scratch as easily, but it could chip, right? So when you have, of course, when you're using something like titanium, yeah, I mean, it's not like ceramic where it's going to crack, but when it comes to kind of that wear factor, it's something that can be worn down, although it's technically harder than steel. It's something that can wear down versus steel would be soft enough to take maybe some wear and some impact. You know, it would be much harder, a harder surface for titanium, which would mean that, you know, it could be more brittle as well and slowly lose material over time. So that's a nice touch that a lot of people might not even notice. So with all that said, let's actually go ahead and get this piece on wrist. All right, guys, sorry, I know this is a long one, but whenever I get into comparisons, there's always, it just eats time up to kind of go over all that information. But man, look at this. You wouldn't even know if I didn't tell you this thing was thicker. You probably wouldn't even notice. Take a look at the standard model, how it sits on the wrist, and take a look at this titanium model. Can't tell me that you see a difference. Come on, look at that. That thing is just contoured to perfection. Doesn't even, I almost say it almost looks thinner because of the, looks like the slope angle on the bezel insert. It might not even be a different angle. Maybe it's just the brushing has a way of just flattening it out. But man, this thing wears beautifully, just like you'd expect from this case. I mean, this case shape, the finishing, the beveling, it all just works big time, guys. It's my 7¼ inch wrist. You can see a little bit more arm in there. I do wear my watch is a little bit lower and looser, but you know, if you can see, you know, I can pull it up on the wrist a little bit as well. If some of you want to see what it looks like a little bit higher up, essentially. Man, this thing is beautiful. And it's not a small piece by any means, guys. A 42mm diver is a full-size dive watch. It's not oversized. It's not medium-sized. This is probably about how big dive watches should be, at least ones that are dedicated divers. And then you kind of get into that everyday range where, you know, depending on kind of the proportions and whatnot, 40mm seems to be the sweet spot. But a lot of that has to do with, you know, the lugs, the curvature, the lug length, the dial to bezel ratio. So there's a lot that goes into it aside from just, hey, this is 42mm versus 40mm, because when you think about that, that's only 1mm of difference on either side. Yet you have such diehard camps for 40mm watches that are just, oh, this is too big. For 1mm on either side, come on, guys. But man, this thing looks absolutely great. Again, comparison there. Take a look how it rides on the wrist. It's really, really tough to say that there's a noticeable visual difference there in the thickness, guys. That thing just wears magnificent. So let's go ahead and actually set up some loom shots and low light transition, and then we can get into final closing thoughts. All right, we'll go ahead and hit the lights. As you can see, that loom is absolutely fantastic. Even at the offset there with that dual baton at the 12, you can easily get oriented as far as what the time is. You can see even those indexes there that go fully around the bezel are quite legible, and then ultra legible for that first 15. So really beautifully done. And then what I like to do is also get some low light transition so you can get an idea of what this piece is going to look like, how it's going to render in less than optimal lighting. Sometimes a little bit harsher lighting there, higher contrast that really get into some of those, exposing some of the imperfections in the finish. But you can see just how uniform the light glides over that fine brushing. Looks absolutely fantastic. And you can see that even in that transitional lighting there, where you're getting less contrast, it's still quite readable and legible. And a lot of that has to do with how deep and inky that black dial is. That thing is just a black hole. And then you can even see that nicely ghosted twin flag logo. Very nice. Man. And then you get to some real harsh lighting here. You can just, it just almost accentuates how beautifully brushed that ceramic insert is. Really nice. Huge fan of the way this one turned out. Guys, needless to say, this thing is legit. It's premium. It feels premium. It's a fine timepiece, and I'm very, very impressed with it. On the wrist, of course, ultra lightweight in comparison to your standard steel model. And then the crazy thing is the additional thickness is nowhere near as noticeable as I thought it would be. And I'm somebody that, of course, wears a lot of different watches and has quite a few in the rotation. So for me to be a little bit apprehensive like that, you know, I'm normally pretty understanding. So I was really blown away with how different this thing felt, but it felt lighter and tighter than I imagined. And I imagined it was going to be a lot more top heavy. It really wasn't. It was just as balanced. They've done so many more tricks to this timepiece to really, you know, because of that base model is that damn good. It's like when you have a really great, you know, canvas to play on top of, it just makes everything that comes after that much better. And I think that's what it is. I mean, it's kind of like you think of a modern 911, right? Geez, the base models now, I mean, technically they all have turbos, right? So you don't even have to buy the turbo model to get a turbo anymore. And they're such amazing cars, even in just your basic configurations now at this point, that as you go up in the echelons and you start adding on and tacking on a lot more capabilities, it really doesn't give you that much more of a difference. And that's kind of what I expected. I expected this to feel a bit top heavy, and I thought there was going to be all these differences, but it still feels really, really great, except for the fact that, man, it's a little bit lighter. It's made out of titanium. It's better hypoallergenically. It's better on the skin. You have a display back, so I get to enjoy taking a look at that movement every once in a while. And it's a nice movement, COSC certified. And it has a nicely engraved. It's not like they just put their name on it. You know, there's some nice finishing that they added to the rotor, which I think is interesting to look at and different than your typical perlage, so Geneva stripes. So I think it looks really great. And then you combine that with the fact that it has everything you liked about the standard Mark III Trident, and then you just have just an insane timepiece that now punches even higher, right? The standard model punched so high out of its weight class. Now you have this, which is, it's just nuts. I mean, as far as model variants go, though, guys, they do have a blue dial model with orange accents versus the red. It's not an exact one-to-one. It's not like this is where the black is blue and then where the red is orange. It actually has a little bit more orange than that, and it's a good-looking watch as well. As far as comparable models go, you know, and of course I'm comparing these to their full list prices, as if you were going to buy them directly from a boutique, just like you're buying directly with Christopher Ward, right? You're not buying this gray market. Nobody bought a bunch of these at a wholesale price and is marking them up, you know, very minimally so you can get a better deal. This is, you're buying it directly and everything's covered. So when you compare those prices, something like a Tag Heuer Aqua Racer at $26.50, a Raymond Wheel Freelancer Diver at $17.50, Monta Ocean King $19.70, Turby Lawless $1,500, and those are all steel watches, right? Those are all comparable to the steel model. and those are pretty expensive in comparison to the steel, but a little bit closer in comparison to this titanium 1000 meter diver. Then you compare it to something like the Oris Aquis in titanium, which is 2450, not COSC certified. Maybe Tudor Pelagos, guys. 500 meters of water, so this is double the meter, as you can go twice as deep. It's 14 millimeters thick, in comparison to here, the 15.4. So, you know, it's a little bit thinner, but it has a side slab case, so it's not gonna, it's might have a thinner silhouette, but it's not using any of those tricks to make it any thinner. And yeah, that is Chronometer certified, but that's 4575. So, you know, over almost, you're getting starting to creep towards $5,000. And yeah, you can get them, of course, in-house movement, but you can get some even in the used market with the ETA that are going to be COSC certified, and you know, they're going to be still more expensive than this watch. You know, this is new. And then let's say we even compare it to something like the Omega Planet Ocean Titanium, 600 meters of water resistance, 17 millimeters thick, and that's only for 600 meters of water resistance. COSC certified, that's $8,600. So this thing packs a punch, a hell of a punch, guys. And that's probably why this video has dragged on so damn long, because this thing is gush worthy. I'm just gushing about how good this watch is for the money. I'm blown away. Really, every facet of this watch has been just looked over, and just somebody painstakingly made choices on this watch that have paid off in a way that delivers something that is just really special in anybody's and any collector's you know, in their watch box. This thing holds its own. So with all that said, you know, this bottom line, this thing is a true showcase of what Christopher Ward is capable of in both design and value proposition. Everything they can deliver. Yeah, they've had some watches that do some crazier things, but they costed a lot more. I think this is kind of the distilled version of that. This is not only delivering you so many bells and whistles, but also delivering it at an attainable price, not in a limited edition, you know. So yeah, this thing is absolutely killer, guys. Let me know what you think in the comments below. If you liked the video, please do a like, and if you haven't already, please subscribe for more content just like this. Thanks, guys.